The National Judiciary, the Courts and Democracy. It is telling that one of the earliest struggles between the colonists and the British involved the court system. In 1733, the British governor of New York, William Cosby, replaced a popular judge with a friend, a person alleged to be both corrupt and incompetent. This caused great indignation among the colonists in New York, and soon a newspaper, the New York Weekly Journal, began running a series of articles critical of the governor. Cosby responded by putting the editor of the paper, Peter Zegner, in jail. A colonial jury found Zegner not guilty because the stories he had printed were based on fact. The trial of Peter Zegner was widely followed and is still important today, not only because it dealt with freedom of the press, but also because it highlights the importance the colonists placed on an impartial court system. It is also notable that much of the Bill of Rights addresses the rights of the accused. The Fourth Amendment, for example, forbids illegal searches and establishes the need for probable cause. The Sixth Amendment speaks to jury trials. These safeguards were put in place to ensure that leaders in the United States could not maintain power by manipulating the courts. Finally, the framers of the Constitution thought it essential that federal judges be separated from public pressures as well as from coercion from the other branches of government. This is why it is stipulated that federal judges be appointed rather than elected, and that they serve for life. Judges are to make decisions based on the law without facing the prospect of removal for issuing an unpopular decision. Put in another way, the framers of our system believed that in a functioning democracy, the law would rule, not tyrants or popular opinion. Creation of a national judiciary. During the years the Articles of Confederation were in force, there were no national courts and no national judiciary. The laws of the United States were interpreted and applied as each state saw fit, and sometimes not at all. Disputes between states and between persons who lived in different states were decided, if at all, by the courts in one of the states involved. Often decisions by the courts in one state were ignored by courts in the other states. Alexander Hamilton spoke to the point in the Federalist No. 22. He described the want of a judiciary power as a circumstance which crowns the defects of the Confederation. Arguing the need for a federal court system, he added, "Laws are a dead letter without courts to expound and define their true meaning and operation." The framers created a national judiciary for the United States in the following single sentence in the Constitution. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. Congress also is given the express power to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, that is, create the rest of the federal court system, in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 9. A dual court system, federal courts and state courts. Keep in mind this important point about the structure of the court system in the United States. There are two separate court systems. On the one hand, the federal court system spans the country with its more than 100 courts. On the other hand, each of the 50 states has its own system of courts. Their numbers run well into the thousands, and most of the cases that are heard in court today are heard in those state courts, not the federal courts. The first type of federal court, constitutional courts. The Constitution establishes the Supreme Court and leaves to Congress the creation of the inferior courts, the lower federal courts, those beneath the Supreme Court. Over the years, Congress has created two distinct types of federal courts, the constitutional courts and the special courts. Constitutional courts are those federal courts that Congress has formed under Article 3 to exercise the judicial power of the United States. Together with the Supreme Court, they now include the Courts of Appeals, the District Courts, and the U.S. Court of International Trade. The constitutional courts are also called the regular courts and sometimes Article 3 courts. The second type of federal court, special court. The special courts do not exercise the broad judicial power of the United States. Rather, they have been created by Congress to hear cases arising out of some of the expressed powers given to Congress in Article 1, Section 8. The special courts hear a much narrower range of cases than those that may come before the constitutional courts. These special courts are also called the legislative courts and sometimes Article 1 courts. Today they include the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces, U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, U.S. Court of Federal Claims, the U.S. Tax Court, the various territorial courts, and the courts of the District of Columbia.